Isaac Klein, like many others, watched the ocean waters roll in. The water had risen on the streets just before the curves. But could a hurricane really happen in Galveston, Texas? Hello, I'm your host, Samantha Heron, and today's topic is the Galveston hurricane of 1900, the most deadliest disaster in U.S. history. Before we start the episode, I want to apologize for any background noise. My AC is running heavily lately, and if you hear any jingling, that would be my cat Storm doing cat things. Anyways, let's get this storm rolling. Galveston, Texas, a coastal city that acts as a port. This beautiful city sits on an elevation of 7 feet. The city was becoming very productive and by 1885, one of the largest ports in the U.S. They were in competition with Houston for the title, which might have led to the story. I want to start off with two boys, Isaac and Joseph Klein. These brothers were born in Tennessee. Isaac was born in 1861 and his younger brother Joseph, 1870. During this time, the Civil War is still going on. Their childhood years were mainly quiet. I really couldn't find any data on them during those years. Isaac joined the U.S. Army to take daily weather readings. He first started in Arkansas. While he was working there, he also got his medicine doctorate. Isaac then moved to Abilene, Texas, and met his wife Cora, marrying her in 1887. During March of 1889, Isaac was sent to Galveston to work at the Weather Bureau there. In 1891, the Weather Bureau moved into the Department of Agriculture instead of the Army sector. It is worth noting here that Isaac was very popular with meteorological studies. This gained him public view and let people trust him. In 1891, Isaac wrote an article in the Galveston Daily News. This article roughly states that hurricanes doing serious harm to Galveston and Texas was a crazy idea. As we weather buffs know, this simply isn't true. This statement was most likely due to the competition between Houston and Galveston for the Seaport Dock Center. As this was published, city officials had stopped all construction for a seawall, believing that Isaac was correct. Not long after, in 1892, Joseph became part of the meteorology crew at the Bureau. During the summer of 1900, a tropical disturbance in the Middle Atlantic started to form. This is a guess that it was from Africa, since historical records during this time were not modern. The disturbance crosses over the Caribbean, passing over the Leeward Islands on August 30th as a tropical disturbance. In Galveston, the summer heat was intense as people played in the ocean water to attempt to cool down. Little did they know that trouble was brewing to their east. As the disturbance moves to the northwest, it goes through Puerto Rico. It transforms into a tropical storm around Cuba, dropping loads of rain on September 3rd. This so far is a slow-moving hurricane, it seems. This can be a problem as it slows down the more rain it can drop. A Cuban station witnessed 17 inches of rain in a range of a day and a half. Wedging between Florida and Cuba, the storm strengthened into a Category 1 hurricane on September 5th. The winds had started to pick up about 45 miles an hour, shifting to the southeast as the pressure dropped lower. Cubans at this time knew something was happening. Since the area was in tropical weather territory, they knew the way storms and hurricanes worked as they passed by. At this time, weather officials know there is a hurricane near Florida, but due to Klein's comments, they thought that the hurricane turned northeastward to pass over Florida. This was not the case very clearly. But why didn't the Cubans address the U.S. about the danger? Cuban revolutionaries had occurred before this time, with the United States helping them out in the end, but the U.S. planted themselves on the island, creating the Weather Bureau. This kind of caused the U.S. people to have disdain for Cubans. So Cubans warning the Americans was kind of a waste of time. So how did Cuba know there was a bad system on the way? Well, Father Benito Deniers had been studying tropical weather in 1858, creating an observatory there in Havana. I'm going to apologize right now. I don't know exactly how to pronounce these names very well. I'm going to try my best. And if anyone's offended, please let me know in the comments how to properly pronounce it. At this time, this was the most advanced area for tropical weather. So the US not listening to someone who was running the most advanced tropical observatory was a kind of dumb move, to be honest. The father who came after Venus, Father Lorenzo Ganguite, noticed on September 5th there was a halo around the moon. Cirrus clouds were turning to the northwest. These reports he made meant that the storm was gaining intensity. With Willis Moore, the DC Weather Bureau director, blocking the forecast made by the Cubans, Ganguite could only sit and watch. Since the U.S. was not as used to the tropical weather that Cuba had, and the statement that Isaac Klein had made previously, officials thought that the system had moved to the northeast, over the northern Florida coast. Warnings were made for parts of the southeast over Florida and Georgia. Little did they know they were focused on the wrong area. Without warnings from the D.C. Weather Bureau, ships had no idea that there was a threat in the Gulf Coast. 2 counts, although there is probably more, recounted their stories. The Louisiana steamship was to bring people to New York from New Orleans. Captain Halsey noticed something wasn't quite right as he continued. The pressure continued to drop as the hurricane came closer. On September 6th, Halsey continued to see conditions worsen as winds around 100 miles an hour rocked the ship. The pressure had gone all the way down to 965 millibars, estimated to be around Category 3 territory. The rapid growth of this hurricane was frightening, becoming a major hurricane in about a full day's time. Luckily for the Louisiana crew, the ship survived and traveled to New York. While roaming the warm Gulf of Mexico waters, the hurricane became an estimated Category 4 monster. So why did the hurricane have such a boost as it entered the Gulf of Mexico? As it left the Florida coast, the hurricane was a Category 1. This is due to the change in temperatures of the ocean below. Of course, the hurricane could have intensified in the Atlantic Ocean, but the Gulf of Mexico, especially during the summer months, provides very, very warm sea surface temperatures. Hurricanes, in order to intensify, need 80 degrees Fahrenheit or higher for sea surface temperatures. On average, in the Gulf around September, the temperatures are about 84 degrees Fahrenheit. Plenty of energy in the Gulf for hurricanes. It's like when you have an energy drink. This is for those who aren't burnt out on energy drinks. The liquid provides enough energy to help enhance the progress or things you were doing. Strengthening the hurricane, intensifying your energy. This isn't getting through to anyone. The other ship, the Pensacola, left Galveston early on September 7th. Captain Simmons never got any warnings as he left the town. After he left, Simmons knew something was happening. The seas were choppy and winds powerful. Simmons, who thought he was used to hurricanes and had driven through them, decided to push his way through this one. After most of the day battling the storm, he decided to anchor instead of pushing to Pensacola. So he is out in the ocean during this hurricane. Unfortunately, the chain to the anchor snapped the next morning, and the ship is struggling to not be flipped like a goddamn pancake. For a whole day, the ship was at mercy of the storm until September 9th, when Simmons got control back and went to Galveston. At first, he struggled to find where he was. Most of the landmarking had vanished. He got to the shore and was in horror of the state of the town. Also during the 7th, the Weather Bureau had changed its forecast. The forecast had now stated that the storm had not hit the East Coast like predicted, but the storm was still in the Gulf of Mexico. This caused them to send up storm warning flags. All of this occurred before Captain Simmons had left. September 8, 1900. During the morning hours, the water around the island started to rise. People watched as the storm surge moved its way into town. Forecasters had no way to know about the hardship the steamships had gone through the day before. The townfolk would walk through the waters to get home and work. Some people thought nothing of it, while others knew something bad was starting to happen. Throughout the day, the water would rise in the town. As this was occurring, a train was sent to drop off people at a ferry. They had no news from the ships and thought it was going to be a safe day. When they got to their drop-off spot, the water had risen above the tracks. The order for the train to go back was barked out, but 10 people left and found a lighthouse nearby. They were the only ones who survived the train ride there, as the train disappeared into storm waters. Not long after, the bridges were destroyed and the island was alone. At around noon in Galveston, people weren't afraid of the storm. Wading through water to get to Ritter's Cafe, 13 gentlemen were having a blast at lunch, laughing and joking. Suddenly, and without warning, the wind ripped off the roof of the building, and the floor above the diner crashed down on everyone there. 5 people were killed, and a waiter was sent to retrieve help. He would drown in this endeavor. Word of the accident had spread like wildfire throughout the town. This started grabbing people's attention and had them worried for all the right reasons. On the east side of Galveston, the Lucas Terrace Apartments, a 3-story building, was becoming a beacon of hope for people who had lived next to it. Surrounding the apartment building were 1-floor homes. As the water rose, more and more people rushed into the building. Sadly, only 22 people made it out, surviving in a single room that hadn't washed away. Before 8:30 in the evening, the water was at 4 foot. Then, the water rapidly rose to 9 foot in certain points of the city. Not only did the storm surges provide flooding in the town, the hurricane provided plenty of rainwater. This dropped 9 more inches of water on Galveston. But water wasn't the only problem in this storm. Wind had blown rubble into buildings, slamming into them with such force that it would damage the building and in some cases break off parts of the building. People could not walk in these winds, at times being pressed against the wall with such force that they felt pinned. Winds are suggested to be around 145 miles per hour, but we are not certain about this. The death toll is unknown, but estimated to be at least 8,000 people. To put in perspective, Galveston before the hurricane was approaching 38,000 people on the island. Sadly, most bodies were never identified, as most washed out to sea. It is very disheartening to see that these types of disasters happen. After things started settling down, Joseph was selected to work at the Dallas Weather Bureau in 1913. Honestly, in my mind, this makes me feel good about the aftermath, as he was usually viewed as, oh, you don't know anything about weather like your brother Isaac. Isaac instead was moved to the New Orleans office in 1901. This feels a little sketchy to me, moving so quickly after you just lost your family. To be fair, if you basically ignored a storm powerful enough to wipe out a good amount of your town because you didn't think it was possible, I would want to move away from the memory too. Although mistakes were made, both brothers went on to do amazing work in the meteorology field. I'm doing this story to cover one of the most important tales in hurricane history, as well as connecting this to events happening soon. Right now is the Eastern Pacific hurricane season. June 1st marks the beginning of the Atlantic hurricane season. Atlantic hurricane season is the harder hitting in the hurricane seasons, as most Atlantic hurricanes hit land. Eastern hurricanes tend to not hit land as much and fizzle out in the Central Pacific. Sometimes they do hit land, and you need to have a plan when that happens. For more important information about hurricane safety, go to FEMA.gov and search for hurricane tips. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next disaster. Bye.